Good day, everyone. This is Charles X. White with Charity Productions, also your host for Community Views and Solutions. We are back, and we are full of information that we're going to provide to you. Today's program is a program that we are going to be instituting with scholars, scientists, professionals, and practitioners. First, I want to introduce Dr. Jorge Fenegaz, who is an Associate Vice President of Academic and Strategic Partnerships, Collaborations. And he is going to also, was formerly the Dean of the School or College of Architecture and Landscape. And now he's the Director of the Institute for Sustainable Communities, which they saw fit to include Charity Productions and myself in several projects, research projects, as well as designation of a community fellow for the Institute. So we at Charity Productions and on myself, I appreciate the acknowledgement, the designation, the cooperation, the resources that we are sharing, trying to make the community better. Texas A&M has on-the-ground projects going back about 12 years. When we first got connected in 2009, we did the joint conference at the hotel, 2010, 2011. So with emergency management, so we got a track record. We got some footprints in the sand. Our other guest is Dr. John Cooper, who is also with the Associate Vice President's office, and you report to Dr. Vanegas, right?
Correct.
So we have two of the most strategic people at Texas A&M for outreach, collaboration, and strategies. So welcome, gentlemen, and let's open up this discussion with Doc. Tell us a little bit about you and your area of expertise, and somewhere at the end or close to the end, and after John says something about himself, we'll talk about how we got together.
So Charles, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and coming from Texas A&M, howdy to you and everybody out there that is seeing this program. It is sincerely a privilege and an honor to be here representing our new division, which did not exist until last year. President Kathy Banks has made a significant amount of changes at Texas A&M that have realigned academic units and that have strengthened the operational efficiency of the university, and it's an ongoing process. As a positive result of those changes, the Division of Academic and Strategic Collaborations was founded. We have 5 departments inside that division, and John and myself are part of the Department of Engagement for Sustainability. But what's important about that, to reinforce what you just said, is that our whole division is about community. That is the common thread on all the areas that our new division does. First, it's about leadership and community engagement. Dr. Fred McClure is the director of that. And within that, we have some programs that are going to be very beneficial to communities across not only Texas, but also across the United States and the world. And that is specifically the Public Policy Internship Program. The second thing is that we are now also doing community outreach because all the recruitment and all the admissions are also part of our division. That means that we want the best students to be looking at Texas A&M as a university and an opportunity for them to grow as professionals in whatever career they want. So having that community outreach is also a very important part because it's going to allow us to diversify what Texas A&M has been. We achieved a Hispanic Serving Institution designation last year, and we want to really emphasize that we want to represent what the demographics of Texas and the nation really are. The next one is also very important, and that is that we also have community impact and economic development. So we have a whole department that is in charge of all of that. And that includes workforce development, that includes the whole idea of professional education. So it's very aligned with what Charity Productions has been doing. We also have another department, and Dr. Rebecca Dudensing is the one that leads that. She comes from an ag extension background. We also have global engagement. So we have the community that is international, that we all share things along this planet. And Dr. Holly Hudson is in charge now of global engagement. So now we're talking not only the communities here, but also communities around the world that share the same kind of problems that we have. And that leaves the last department, which is ours, which is engagement for sustainability. And we are still responsible, a program that you're familiar with, the colonias along the border with Mexico, all those disadvantaged communities, but also a very important asset that I think John will be talking a little bit more, and that's a Texas Target Communities, which is one outreach that normally is not as seen as the normal agencies of agriculture extension and engineering extension, but we play a very big role in the communities directly. And the Office of Sustainability is also part of ours. And that means that we are in the process of making all the institution very sustainable in multiple ways. And the last part is the Institute for Sustainable Communities, which I have also the honor of being the director. John was very involved in setting it all up, and he'll be able to tell us more about that. But with that capacity of reaching out, I want to say that it builds on my previous 14 years as Dean of the College of Architecture, which is now a School of Architecture. Within that, what's important to convey is that you cannot have community without infrastructure. You cannot have community without good housing, quality housing. And what I learned in dealing with architecture, dealing with urban planning and design, dealing with landscape architecture, land and property development, construction and facility management, is that we are about three things. And I'm very proud about that. And that is quality of life for people, and quality of life from people from the moment they're conceived till the moment we all depart. And that is an important part. You cannot have community without people. So for me, people is number one. But then you have two other parts, and that is that where do people live? And that is the quality of place. And that is very important what we do through research. Enhancing the quality of place in the natural environment to protect and conserve what we have. In the built environment to make sure that we don't screw things up. And also in the virtual environment, because today we operate in the virtual environment. So for us, quality of life and quality on place come together in those three environments. But that leaves one more part, and that part is, what do people do in a place? So we're talking now the whole realm of human endeavors. And in doing that, now we're talking about verbs. It's not about building houses, it's about creating homes and having a home life. It's not about creating hospitals, it's about enabling wellness and health. It's not about building schools, it's about enabling education and training and skill development. So when you operate on quality of life, place, and human endeavor, the thread that puts everything in one single cohesive whole is the word community. And that is why we are committed, and here I'm talking on behalf of our whole team, to work with communities, and I'm very proud of the two main pillars of that I am sure John is going to expand on that. And that is that for a land grant, sea grant, and space grant designation institution like Texas A&M, combined with the American Association of Universities, AAU, Tier 1 research, which has crossed the $1 billion mark since 2 years ago. Everything we do is
Wait a
through
minute,
the
Doc,
service.
wait a minute. $1 billion
Dollars a year in research.
Well, Doc, let's work on 2 million.
But what's important is that with that capacity,
Yeah.
and because of our land grant designation, all the research we do will have to end up in the hands of people.
Right.
to enhance their place into what they do in a place. And what they do in a place could be a laboratory discovering the next cure for whatever comes down the pipeline. So it's a very comprehensive level. My job is to try to connect the dots. My job is not to be very deep in one single discipline. It's to create the culture and environment that actually treats communities at par with the scientists, communities at par with the researchers, communities at par with the students. So service, high impact service learning and high impact engaged research are two of the fundamental values and pillars of what we believe. And that is why we're here today.
Yes, sir.
And that's why I work with someone like Dr. John Cooper in making this happen completely. And I'll be happy to expand as we move on.
Because I want you to, both of y'all can expand on the point about Tier 1. Dr. Cooper, give us a little overview of everything dealing with your expertise, Texas A&M, Charity Productions. You can touch on that a little bit, but more or less how you engage from your position.
So let me start with saying my title is Assistant Vice President in the Division of Academic and Strategic Collaborations. I work alongside Dr. Vanegas. And he said a lot about our mission and purpose in the division. And I'll just say for my part, I have a specific charge to provide counsel and guidance on one thing, the Texas Target Communities Program, which he mentioned. That is a 30-year-old initiative, initially launched in the Department of Landscape Architecture and Urban Planning, which focuses on providing technical assistance to mostly small towns, rural communities and counties that don't have access to professional planners on staff or may not have the wherewithal to hire consultants to do community development work. I am a former director of the Texas Target Communities Program. I've since stepped down, but it's still part of our portfolio. And the director now is Jamie Masterson, and she's doing a great job. And so I am available to her to provide just as guidance on the engagement and collaborative partnerships work out of Texas Target Communities. I'm also charged with leading efforts to broker more relationships with collaborations through Prairie View A&M University. This is an initiative that was announced by Chancellor John Sharp. Its intent is to maximize the resources at our campuses. A&M and Texas A&M and Prairie View are both land-grant universities, which means that it is in their charter to be of assistance to our constituencies, which are the citizens of Texas. And so I'm in charge of figuring out ways to leverage and maximize the resources at both campuses for the benefit of our constituencies, the citizens of Texas, you people who are viewing this this broadcast. You talked about, I should share a little bit more about my background and experience so that the viewers get a sense of the perspective that I bring to this. So I got back to Texas A&M in 2012. I say get back to because my undergraduate and master's degrees are from Texas A&M. But before I got to A&M and back to A&M in 2012, I spent 9 years working at a nonprofit based in North Carolina, which had a national reputation for this kind of collaborative engagement, community-centered work that I think we're going to get into in this conversation. I did that for 9 years, and I was led to that organization after finishing my PhD at UNC Chapel Hill, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where I worked on a dissertation which focused on the extent to which underrepresented populations, marginalized populations, whatever descriptor you use, we know who we're talking about here, people who are typically left out of decision making, right? So I wrote a dissertation about the extent to which those stakeholders, those populations are accounted for in planning, in land use planning. And I discovered that there was not a lot of effort on that, focus on that, for whatever reason. It could be that local planners aren't committed to it. They may not be qualified to do it, but whatever the case. And I wanted to become more skilled at fostering those kinds of collaborations, that kind of inclusive planning that accounted for the needs of underserved populations informal policies, formal land use regulations, and other kinds of decisions that affect the people and the places that they care about. So that was important to me. And I was driven to want to write about that because of my background. I'm a native of Texas. I'm the fifth generation of a family. I was born and raised in East Texas in a small town called Jefferson. And my family, for generations, as far back as I know, at least the stories I've been told, they were always engaged in public discourse, civic engagement, voter registration. Working the polls, right? And they were known for their commitment to their people in those communities. So I feel like. For a couple decades now of research and practice, and community engagement, community collaboration is in my DNA. So I'm honored that you would invite me to be in conversation with you, and I look forward to being in collaboration with you going forward after this.
Well, that brings us to this point. Just give us an idea of what Tier 1 university means in the broader sense.
65 universities have achieved that designation. Tier 1 research spans a very large scope. Research can be monodisciplinary, one single discipline as deep down as you want, or research can be pluridisciplinary, where multiple disciplines come together. The best framework for research has to do with a continuum that begins with understanding baselines. Where are we? Those baselines, and it's part of what Dr. Cooper and all these people are, communities sometimes know where they are, but they don't really document it in a way that others can do something about it. The opposite is the visions where we want to go. So it's data at the beginning, the data that we're going to collect, and making that connection. A Tier 1 research university focuses, obviously, in these two kind of extremes. But what really happens is in the middle. How do you connect today with tomorrow? How do you build tomorrow today? And that is a continuum that actually has separate components. A Tier 1 encompasses all of them. The first one is research. It may sound like a redundancy, but there are different kinds of research. Applied, fundamental. The issue about research is that you need to develop new knowledge. Knowledge that can then be applied. Knowledge that can apply becomes experience, and it becomes a whole element. But research on its own can end up in a piece of paper.
Correct.
So you need the second part, and that is research that leads to development. So sometimes the proof of concept can go and do that. And the Tier 1 comes from the different sources that are pumping the resources to do fundamental research. There are certain agencies that focus only on fundamental research. There are other agencies that focus on development of that research. Then you have the next one, which is demonstration, validation. Does it work? Doesn't it work? So once you go from research to development to demonstration, then you go to deployment and implementation. So in that cycle, that's where communities play a very important role. So it's a scientific community. Well, they're doing things in health, or they're doing things in education, or they're doing things in remediation, conservation, whatever it is. That's where the knowledge domains are. But the last two parts are also very important. And that is that if you do not constantly evaluate what you're doing, so there's a whole issue of constant assessment, and that's what the AAU designation does. They constantly assess the capacity of a university to conduct research that is making a difference. It's about preeminent research. It's about seminal research. It's about seminal research that provides the foundation for more research. And it's about impact. So it's a very exclusive club. Universities get kicked out when they don't meet those thresholds. It's all documented into what they do. And then when you have that constant assessment and evaluation, that is the last piece is we need to disseminate. We need to put it in the hands. So that's where dissemination and the knowledge transfer is what happens. So a lot of what we do, and I think that we are very unique, and the credit goes to Dr. Cooper and how we were able to formalize that. And you know very well there's a covenant with communities to do research in which it's a partnership where things are actually shared. So the tier research means that you are gathering a lot of externally funded support, that's the one that counts the most, from any source. The federal agencies, state agencies, philanthropic foundations, corporate foundations, and even investments of corporations directly. So we are very proud that under our system, we have broken that $1 billion mark, and now it's a matter of sustaining it and keep on doing it. But the more capacity you build, the more everybody benefits. So
Right.
Going back to that, that's what a tier 1 does.
So how will Prairie Review connect with the initiative you said Chancellor Sharp started? Prairie Review is also in this collaborative that we are putting together professionals, practitioners, scientists, and scholars. So maybe give me a little insight on what I need to be saying to the group that I'm working with. And that's the land-grant college group with Professor Eswick.
We are still in the early stages of kind of mapping out what the collaboration will look like. That involves me kind of scanning the landscape to see where there are common majors or maybe common research interests. For example, we talked about coming from the School of Architecture and me particularly, I'm a professor of the practice in the urban planning program. Prairie View also has a college of architecture. So we're looking, we're brokering meetings to find out where there are gaps are in courses, and we're looking at faculty exchanges, student exchanges and stuff like that. But in particular, as it relates to what you are trying to do, I think we're trying to identify community-based projects that we can partner on. For example, there's one that involved the design faculty at A&M and Prairie View, whereby they were kind of coming up with design concepts for the Juneteenth spaces around Galveston. There's also opportunities, I think, related to community resilience, whereby we are bringing together faculty with expertise in disaster mitigation, community-based preparedness, and we are working with community partners to figure out what level of risk they face, what are the most promising strategies for those communities, and then ways of kind of designing those strategies for that specific context. Right?
Well, let me ask you this. There's a hot zone, and the community is in the middle of the hot zone. The community is the end user, the value added, and the treasure that universities are looking for. City government is involved, and when Dr. McCoy comes on, we're going to talk about our analysis of the 25 zip codes, roughly 80 subdivisions that impact 703,000 people. But it is the footprint with those 25 zip codes of designated negative energy, negative terms, low performing, all of those political terms that make a community intergenerational subject to low performing city government. Now I know y'all don't get into the politics, at least to whatever degree that is, but public policy puts you in to a certain extent. So what I have ascertained over the last 38 years is not only do the citizens need to understand a baseline of how to advocate that includes research, applied, and theoretical. Because what we need to do, the end user, and I give this example a lot from Tracy. He had a call from a resident. Tracy Stevens is the president of our Sunnyside Sunnyside Civic Club, and he was the chairman of the Sunnyside South Park Super Neighborhood Public Works. And so there was a taxpayer that was told by a city employee in Public Works that she needed to pay for the renovation of her driveway and sidewalk because they were dealing with the drainage. So Tracy got involved and said that's not true because the policy under a previous mayor included the repairs would be on the city. Well, there are certain things that I believe a homeowner should know that deals with the property taxes and service delivery coming from whatever form of government, non-government. So in the black community, we have not been trained, educated, gone to school to understand that cycle that you were talking about. Because knowledge has a cycle to its own. And when you apply it and when you hold it over here and gather more information. So we have at least 80 subdivisions, black, and it could be as many as 140 if we find all of the Hispanic subdivisions. But we got 80 of them that for at least 100 years have been in the losing end on tax-based services because they don't know. They don't have that institution or institutions or service providers explaining and showing how the dots are connected. And what are your rights? Because that's what it comes down to, taxpayer rights. And so what we think that we have a model that we have almost perfected that's going to be that incubator, that entity of distribution of information with scientific applications and infrastructure. Because people are shot down. I was floored when I watched a video from a school board meeting that a school board trustee was at this public meeting and they were asking for public comment. So a lady gave a comment or a recommendation, and the trustee's response was, he asked her a question. He said, do you have any children in HISD? The lady said, no. Well, his response was, I think it's disingenuous for you to make a recommendation and you don't have any children in HISD. It doesn't matter. She's a taxpayer. 76.2% of HISD's budget comes from property taxes. So whether she had a child in HISD or not didn't matter. But see, that's that gap that allows these things to go on and on and on because the other side of the story has not been conveyed to the taxpayer or the citizen as to their rights. And so from that standpoint, there's a whole nother governmental land grab takeover that's not necessarily taking the actual land, but it's giving them control over the space. And the homeowner is not aware of what that looks like and sounds like, and when they get the information, they have lost either their home, or their property, or just being misused because they didn't know their rights?
Yeah, first, I want to thank you for clarifying that we tend to be impartial. Our preference is to be impartial as stewards of the public trust, employees of Texas A&M University and the Texas A&M system. Our role is to provide our citizen constituents with state-of-the-art information. We work to gather information to help inform their discretion. And I've found it in my work that lay people can make wise decisions if they have access to information, state-of-the-art information.
Correct.
Right? And so our job, and what makes our approach to doing that is we take into account what we call indigenous knowledge. We recognize that people in communities have knowledge by virtue of their experience, by virtue of living in places. And so we try to factor that in when we present a baseline data assessment. But then we trust that our community partners can process the information with some technical assistance and draw their own conclusions.
Correct.
And again, I believe community folks can make wise decisions. At least I've seen that over and over again. People can get the point, get the picture, and then advocate for policy changes on their own. And an example, you said that community partners are value added, and there are the end users. And you gave the example of, it was an infrastructure example in a case that we've worked on in the past. We had a faculty person in engineering who was looking to test some state-of-the-art radar technology for assessing the quality of infrastructure, right? And so he partnered with community stakeholders in a neighborhood to do those assessments, and he used students. And so the value for us was the faculty person got to test this new radar. The students got hands-on experience in the field working with community partners. The community partners then got the benefit of these state-of-the-art assessments of the quality of their infrastructure that they could then go use to advocate for improvements.
Well,
And
see,
so, yeah.
see, this is where the new knowledge comes in. Everybody has their limitations, so to speak. Mm-hmm. Everybody has their own interests. But from my eyes, I see that all interests are relative, and everybody's interest can be served, including government. But that's not your issue. That's our fight from the community side. But as long as you can assist in giving us the scientific aspects of it, that we can say that the data shows this. We're not making it personal. We're trying to deal with our rights, and this is what we see as a taxpayer, and this is our submission of public policy or a plan that includes infrastructure.
Yeah.
So instead of being argumentative, no, we think that the equalization of information and the quality of information put in the hands of the end user is going to make them a better partner, consumer, and everything else. But for some reason or another, the political model is adversarial. Now, that's me saying that. And any politician from Trump on back can ask me about it. But the point is that that's what we're dealing with. And when we go to our diagram of those 25 zip codes and 80 subdivisions and so on and so on, that's what the data says. And that's not what Charles says. That's not what John says or Jorge says. This is what we're reading the data.
And as a top tier university, our obligation, our commitment is to stand behind our data, right? We have the highest standards for gathering and assessing the data that we provide to communities, and we provide some assistance with access to and analysis of that data at a level that lay people can understand. But that our commitment is making sure that the data is top notch.
Right.
Yep. So you raised several points that I have to address.
Come on.
And that's a very good one. So here is something to think about. We live right now in a world of extreme polarization.
Okay.
For everybody that provides data coming from science, you're going to have someone that provides opinion coming from their own perception.
Of course.
It's a muddy set of water. Our role here is not to be the bearers of the truth, but part of what we do in our process of engaged community research and service learning is to actually create that space that for me begins with a very simple thing. It's a space where Jedi prevails. And this may sound like Star Wars, but it's not. You cannot achieve the goals of a community without justice. You cannot achieve it without equity. You cannot achieve it without diversity. And you cannot achieve it without inclusion. Those words on their own have been weaponized in multiple ways.
Correct.
We, in the university, and I want to emphasize what John says, we have a duty, being a public university and a land grant, to make sure that we don't fall into that trap.
Correct.
We are swimming in an ocean, in a tsunami of data. Data on its own is meaningless until it becomes information that can be used. Information on its own is meaningless unless it becomes knowledge that can be applied. Knowledge on its own does not change anything until you apply it and learn from that application the lessons learned of experience. Now that continuum fed by data, going through information, that continuum, okay, is what makes the world move, because you've heard it, and I'm going to say the 4 areas of research of our institute today. It's all about intelligence. You cannot have intelligence without knowledge that is applied into lessons learned that becomes experience. So intelligence is that synchronicity between knowing and doing, and what do you learn from that? But what we have missed the boat in many communities is that we are dismissing the wisdom that only comes from having lived through the hardships, the ups and the downs and everything. So the continuum that we want to do, that I want to do in directing our institutes and everything, is a continuum that recognizes that at each step, data, information, knowledge, experience, intelligence, and wisdom, okay, all are part of the community. The second thing I like to say is that we are facing a siloization of everything. Everything is a silo, okay? A county is made of many silos. Government is made of many silos. School districts are made of many silos. Everything is a silo. So here you have the problem. The status quo will always be the champion. And the status quo is keeping you where you are because I have a better answer to you. Anything new that can come from research or any source, innovation, creativity, entrepreneurship, is a challenger. So what we are trying to do is create a framework where the challenger has an opportunity to beat the odds of the champion because the champion doesn't want to change. And everybody focuses on what they think they're losing and not on what they are gaining. So there's a whole need to change the narrative and get away from what polarizes. This is not about, you mentioned rights. There are a whole bunch of rights around the world, but a lot of them are violated every single day.
Of course.
And a lot of people see the word rights and they think immediately entitlements. And entitlements, rights, so semantics is a very, very big part. And
Correct.
You know from Charity Productions that how you tell a message can either stick or not stick.
Right.
Our role, repeating what John says, we have a responsibility to be above all of this and not get into the muddy down.
Well, let me say it like this. I'm going to add this. That's the prescribed intent and structure, not to get in. But it's all kind of mud there. It's like you're gonna get some mud. There's gonna be some mud. Now, I agree with everything that you said, and I'm saying what we have put together over this last 12 years, including what we've been able to accomplish with Texas A&M and the different professors and the projects, the data that we collected and all of that. So we have an experience of success. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's one that's on the board. We're going to talk about that in the next segment. But we have a model that regardless to the politics or the muddy water, whatever that may be, lack of information, lack of education, whatever, we have created a potential filter that can filter the emotionalism out of it and replace emotionalism with science. Mm-hmm. And that is what our drive is going to be for the next 20 years. Now, the science that we inject, insert, and describe and explain to the lay people is going to make them better partners with whoever. Because no one person, or no one city government or county government has the answer. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a little break and come back, and we're going to focus on the successes using the theory and the application of science at the community level. That's why we're talking about community science.
Agreed.
We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back. Your host, Charles X. White, representing Charity Productions and Community Views and Solutions. We are real heavy on community views and solutions. Today we are going to have another discussion, or a continued discussion, or ongoing discussion on community science. And that's what our intent is to introduce a new lexicon, a new word grouping, a new vocabulary for the grassroots person, the taxpayer, the John and Jane Doe person. Because we have a problem with service delivery, and everybody that has any connection with services based on taxes has a comment to give. However, what we need are solutions. How do we get more customer-friendly, customer service, taxpayer-based, end-user-based service? Just better representation. Now, that's going to start with individuals that know and can help shape and provide direction. But at the same time, that person, that citizen, that John and Jane Q citizen, they have to be part of the solution process. Well, I want to introduce to you Dr. Ann Mccoy, who is a psychologist and a resident consultant for Charity Productions. And she is going to introduce herself and what she does and how she does it. And then we're going to talk about community science, because we have an analysis that we're going to release on October 20th at our commemoration breakfast gathering on October 20th, 2022. And we want to share some of the excerpts of our research, our intent, and the vocabulary. Dr. Ann Mccoy.
Thank you, Charles. I am a psychologist by training. I have spent the bulk of my career conducting program evaluations. And program evaluation is about answering the question, did it work? So when a program is funded by the federal government, quite often there's a requirement that that program is evaluated. So the people who write the proposal present a program that they will implement, and they predict that certain outcomes will be achieved. And my role in this type of work was always to come by and ask the questions about how effective was this program? Did the program achieve the outcomes that it was designed to achieve. And one of the many things that I learned from doing program evaluations for over 25 years is that you plan a program, but like so many things in life, the program doesn't turn out the way the planners anticipated, because there are things that you're planning for when you write the proposal that when you get the funding, they may not be in place. And so how do people adapt to accommodate those unanticipated changes? And what does that do to the types of services that are delivered, who receives those services, and ultimately the outcomes that various programs achieve? So I think that this is very timely to the extent that there have been a number of programs that have been tested, piloted, implemented within the 27 zip codes. And one of the consistent challenges with federally funded programs is that typically the funding cycle for a program is 3 to 5 years. But typically what happens is it takes a program that long to get up and started. And so this means that the program administrators may go in and hire people. Those people may or may not work out. Well, the clock is continually running and the funding is there. But by the time people figure out how to really run their program, it's time, the money has run out. It's year 3. And so one of the things that they'll write in a proposal that this is how we'll sustain our program, but typically that doesn't happen. So it's important for people to begin with the end in mind. And sustainability is more readily achieved when an intervention becomes part of the way an organization functions, when the intervention is institutionalized. So it's not something extra or something outside. It's part of the way the organization works. And so from that standpoint, I think it's important that whatever programming is started, it has to be begun with the end in mind, recognizing that this money is going to go away, but the people in the community will still be here. So how do we create a program that includes people that it's intended to serve, who will help this program continue, help it to be sustained? How can this program grow in ways that benefits the community after the funding has ended?
Okay, so Mark, can you go to that slide? All right. Now, community science. What does that look like? We know what it sounds like. Earlier in the discussion, I mentioned that in 1995, I came to the realization that a small community-based organization could not survive in the 21st century unless it was connected to a university. Well, this map that is on the screen now, if you look at that reddish angle, space filled in, this is from a report from the City of Houston Health Department on vulnerable populations. We took that map and did an overlay with zip codes. And then we cross-referenced it with other research, education, crime, housing, different categories to find out, was there any overlap? And the overlap gave us our field of operation, which is the 25, 27 zip codes. On that next to the map is a listing of those 25 zip codes. Now, once we publish this analysis that Dr. McCoy gave us some scholarship on. Once we publish it on our website, you will be able to click on that zip code, and the database from that zip code, the demographics, the population, all of that, it'll come up. Now, what's consistent or contiguous with all of those zip codes, connected one to the other, is that they're a vulnerable population. They have a label: low performing, at risk, schools closing in the neighborhood, high unemployment. All of those things are gathered up in that space. Why? What caused that specific pattern? It was a design. The next question is, how do we fix it from where we are? And who do we get to assist us in fixing it? One group is, now Tom Ridge, who used to be was the first Homeland Security Director, in one of his speeches talked about that the first responders only make up 1% of the population. And I'm paraphrasing, but that was his analogy, the 1%. Then he went on to say the logical place to get additional manpower and resources are from the citizens. Then a policy was created, Presidential Directive 4.8, strengthening citizens' capabilities and capacity. So that's where we are on the ground, strengthening citizens' capacity and capabilities, because they are in the geography. The geography is not going to change, even though they do redistricting and all of those gerrymandering things like that. The real estate stays the same. Now, how do we change the dynamics inside that geography? Can you go to the next slide? Now, once we did our overlay, and this is where the Institute of Sustainable Communities came in, and we want to thank all of the students and professors that helped us overlay and come up with these charts and graphs. But if you see, sometimes it's called an inverted C on the map to the left. That represents the 25 zip codes. Now, it's a little different from the one with the city health department because it had grown, it expanded, it got larger, it grew. Based on the different housing research, crime statistics, education statistics, it grew. So that footprint is what we are working with. That's our target. According to the database that we used, that's 703,000 people, 80 subdivisions, and 25 zip codes. That is our target group. And Charity Productions has worked in each one of those zip codes over the last 38 years, either in juvenile services, training the police departments or the school districts, the Harris County School District, HISD, Pasadena, all those different places where we work. Now, Dr. Cooper, first, how important would it be for a neighborhood of advocates with not emotional baggage, but empirical data that provided written solutions? How valuable would that be? How would it change the paradigm? How would it change the outcomes and the services if you had an educated group of citizens? And I'm not talking about all 703,000, but that you had representatives from the bottom up That's one of our pillars is bottom-up, top-down research. So what would your response be? Looking into the future, your crystal ball.
Yeah, I want to, before I look in the future, let me just take a quick glance back.
Okay.
I remember I had a hand in kind of developing what I'm going to call some exploratory research. It's something that you identified. I think you had an idea for this because you were seeing some patterns.
Right.
Right, over time, some concentrations of, I'm going to call them ills, in society, be they health-related, education-related, employment, environmental degradation, hazards, flooding, that kind of stuff. And you just wanted to see the extent to which these things are commonplace in the areas that you worked. Right, and so we began gathering the information. I helped connect you with students and faculty who can pull this information together. And Dr. McCoy, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we stopped short of some kind of statistical analysis that would show the probability that this happened by chance. But in any case, whether or not you carry it out to that step, I think the image is stark. It is clear that something's going on, right?
Right.
And so the point of, again, I talk about informing the discretion of the people in places like this. I think the benefit of having this kind of documentation from a top-tier university, if nothing else, it emboldens their resolve, right? It makes them more confident in knowing that they are not crazy, right?
Right.
The things that they have lived, that they see, that they have some documentation that is the case. And I hope going forward it would again strengthen their resolve. It will fuel their passion. It will help them sustain their hope that things will change. And I would hope that if they were to present this kind of information to a decision maker, that decision maker would in good faith receive the information and try to address the issues. You talked about, well, I don't know if you talked about this or not. You kind of walked up to it, but didn't say it specifically, and I won't.
Okay.
How do we get to this point? I think in my mind, you're looking at some systemic issues right here. A lot of people claim to not understand what systemic racism is or what it means, but I think you're looking at it here. Over time, it's harder to make the connection because once things become embedded, they become the status quo. It's harder to draw the line between what's intentional and what's benign. Whether it's intentional or benign, it is, right? And so I would hope that policymakers would receive the information and with sincerity partner with their community stakeholders, community constituents to address the issues, right? They can't deny that they exist.
Right.
We're looking at them. So
Right.
so the question is, what are we going to do going forward to resolve, to mitigate, to make sure it doesn't happen again? Because every citizen of the United States deserves a safe place to live, safe, clean air to breathe, right? Clean water, right? Peace of mind. That's constitutional as far as I'm concerned.
Well, now you hit it, because basically this is fundamental to the Constitution. That's all we're saying. And you identified another word, hope. See, that brings about a whole nother level of comfort. We got hope that we know we presented good information. If you don't accept it, that's something else. But we gave you the best information out there, and it's based on your statistics, a third party, and us. So let's sit down and talk about it. Dr. McCoy, I'm gonna come back to you about negative terms in that geography used to describe that geography. Dr. Vanegas, we're gonna go to you now about how do you see it futuristically in those systems of things that you described? Because this is not an overnight process. That's why I said the next 20 years, because I'm not looking beyond the next 20, But if we do this next 5 years right, the foundation will be able to go on and on and on, because we will be known as a group that presented a paradigm shift where everybody's input and added value was able to at least be inserted into the big machine. Dr. Vanegas.
It's a fascinating topic, and definitely this is just the opening salvo.
That's all.
Of this.
We're going to come on back again.
I have learned that by using the word solution, we sometimes prevent ourselves from actually affecting change, and I'm going to explain why.
Okay.
I have a continuum of 5 things that drive my research and what I teach on a research class. Fundamental research answers questions, and there are 2 types of questions: the push and the pull questions. The push questions tend to be organized around 2 things that need quick action: problems that need to be solved and needs that need to be satisfied. So if you have a community with problems and needs, they are facing a push, and the research that requires is going to be very different than if you do a community and ask the questions on a pull basis, and those are opportunities and aspirations. Very different. The research on all those 5 things, the questions, the problems, the needs, the opportunities, and the aspirations, can take multiple different levels. So when people talk about only solutions, entrepreneurship for an opportunity does not really have a solution. It has something that comes out of that. So the approaches and the methodologies are going to be very different. That's one of my first disclaimers. So when we're talking about a community, our Institute of Sustainable Communities, we're going to be dealing with the whole questions, problems, needs, opportunities, aspirations, and calibrating as we see in that other continuum that I talked about: data, information, knowledge, etc. The second thing that I like to note in doing this is what, building on, before you came on board, Dr. McCoy, we were talking about that anything new is a challenger, everything that exists is the champion, and the odds tend to favor the champion unless you're able to unequivocally prove that the value of the new one is much, much higher than the one that used to be there, because people are afraid of change. So going back to that, if I do research on a community, okay, and it's going to ruffle the feathers of government or a big business in the community, whatever it may be, what you're doing with the research is a challenger. And I have found that, again, sometimes diffusing the narrative is what needs to be done. So I like to say, leave the status quo alone, because people are comfortable in that, whether with problems or not. That's not what we're trying to do. If you come in saying, I'm a scientist and I want to change the community because I have an answer, you're going to get more people pushing back than anything. So what you start doing is a little bit more of the following. If this is the status quo, the community as it is, and their vested interest in keeping the community where it is. In construction, people make money out of waste. In construction, people make money out of litigation. So there are all these kind of weird things, you know. GDP includes people that die. Why? Because they sell coffins and they sell cemeteries. Exactly. It's a weird way. So the way I look at it is 5 things. If I'm not going to touch that, but I want to affect change, I'm going to go to you, the community leader or the politician or whatever it is, and I'm going to say, you know what? That's fine. We're not going to touch that because that's your business. I am going to strengthen that. So my research is going to strengthen a portion of that without changing the whole thing. It's going to enhance. It's going to complement, it's going to supplement, and it's going to transcend. When you have that circling, this changes on its own when you are creating that. So for me, part of what we need to teach communities is how to actually express the narrative of what they're really wanting to do. An aspiration in a community is very valid, but if you want to say, well, I want this, People are going to come and say, you see, here they are. They want something for nothing. So I'm trying to really stay above the reality in which we go.
Well,
the last thing I'm going to say, and I'm sorry, just want to say it.
okay.
The mentalities that we need to be able to solve those 5 things, to address those 5 things, is very different. And we are not capitalizing on something that I know exists in communities. And that is the will to survive and the creativity of making ends meet when you don't have anything. I look at that on my experience in the colonias, okay? If you could tap that ingenuity, that creativity that maintains families together, you know, they survive. That's the whole point. That's a completely different thing. But we need to start injecting more the ability to do creative thinking, to do design thinking, to do innovative thinking, to do entrepreneurial thinking, and in today's world it has to be digital thinking. So when we are changing the narrative of how to interact with communities, all right, we just need to manage the collateral impacts of what we're causing by trying to solve the problem this way and having people push back in another way. This is something I could talk for hours, so I'm going to pass the ball to somebody else.
So before we go to Dr. McCoy, I did not hear you say anything any different in nature of what we have done and are doing on parallel tracks. That's what we call it, parallel tracks. Don't try to change the status quo. Just run your race that you're gonna run your race, and then at some point it'll come together.
The missing piece is the fact that we're dealing with systems of systems, and what you don't see are the interrelationships, the interdependencies, the gaps and the redundancies that are in there, that when you are solving a problem with science or solving the problem in any way you want, okay, below that surface, you do something here, it's going to spread in the whole thing. So that's what you don't teach in universities.
Right. Now, I think solution is a foundational word. What would be an elevated word coming from solution to another point that would encompass what you said? That's one thing I wanted to ask you from your statement.
A solution could be a physical product. A solution could be a process on how to do something. A solution could be a service that is provided.
Okay.
A solution can be a new business model, which we don't also do. Business models can be applied. It's a value proposition. It's
right.
All those things. So what I want is when you just do one thing without looking at all the things that affect it, we don't really achieve the scope of what we want to achieve.
Okay, now I'm glad you said it like that, because there's nothing that I think that we have demonstrated up to this point was monotheic. No, we got to look at layers, levels, scope, scale. We can do that, okay? Now, let me use this example. You said something else that made me think about this example. We see people working together every time there's a disaster with no training. It's instinctive. It's DNA, hardwired. That is a premise that, and an example, an experience that we know happens. Now, how do we take them from an extreme and dial them back down to process? To process it. In other words, we can do mitigation and threat assessments before a hurricane. And we can do it after a hurricane. So, but what's happening in these zip codes is no threat assessment is done before the fact. It just keeps on, the same thing keeps on happening. That's one example that I see, that people are sophisticated in a way that what we had to harness is like what we're doing now, is those small focus groups and training sessions that help them understand the dynamics of what we're doing. Let's just say with the group that we call our cell phone advocacy group. That's part of that digital stuff that we're gonna get to. But we're gonna start with the cell phone and we're gonna work to the computer. Because some of them have some level, when I say that, the population that we most come in contact with age range is from 44 to 104. So from that standpoint, we have some digital fears about working with a computer, so on. But everybody know how to work that phone. So that cell phone advocacy, we can call City Hall, we can call Public Works and advocate. And if we have a group doing it, which is, we've done it, we've tested it, so it works. We just now have to multiply. And when we are saying what we're saying, take it out of the emotional category and put it into the process data category. That's why we're gonna call some of the people that work with us is community data collectors, so that they understand the value of collecting the data and then how it becomes a public policy or a program solution with a budget for funding to solve this problem over time. Now, I'm glad Dr. McCoy said that the problem has already outgrown funding cycles. That happened 40 years ago, okay? Now we're in a catch-up situation, and the universities, in my mind, for us at the bottom, the community service provider, for us, you could be our advocate to the broader decision makers. To say, I know what you think this is, but it's actually this. Because from what I have experienced is that the status quo puts up a shield before they look and listen at the benefits. Because there's nothing that we do and have done is anti this or that. It's just pro this or that. And it's pro with the understanding that change is consistent with progress. And if we keep the wording, if we do the wording right, like you said earlier, there's nothing that you said that I disagree with. And some of it, I know you've said some of it before to me, but I'm ready to see you teach the class to the people on just those 5 elements that you were talking about, because that opens up the mind.
So I'm going to say also something, and Dr. McCoy, you said you are a psychologist.
Yes.
If I say that I'm an architect, psychologists and architects think very differently. The lens that you use are different to mine.
Right.
You are a planner, Dr. Cooper. Your lenses are very different. You come from within the community. We all have different lenses. And I would say that what we need to teach, more than just algorithms or formulas, is how the value added that Dr. McCoy brings to the table is a perfect complement to what I can bring to the table. None of us have an answer, but we all have the answer. For me, it's a simple change the me, turn up the M upside down, and it becomes we. What we have been missing, and you use the word neighborhood or the community, what we are missing is that we are all in a community where we are. I have a slide that I always use. One planet, one race, one common future. So it's up to us to work together in doing it. So I have been always a champion of not only monodisciplinary, because you have it, but also multidisciplinary, which is different to interdisciplinary, which is different to cross-disciplinary, which is different to transdisciplinary. So the bottom line is that where I would go and where you're going to see our division and our institute go is more directly with the communities. And that is something I'm learning from John in what I have learned in terms of what we want to put in place. And we are not there to teach the community anything. We're there to unleash their agency. We're not there to empower anyone. I don't like that word. Because if I empower you, Dr. McCoy, I am the one giving you the power to be who you are, and that is not correct. I want to create this environment where we actually work together for that common goal that we want to have up here. I'm sorry, I'm getting on my soapbox.
But that's okay. We all got one. Dr. McCoy finna get on one. So what impact will or does or did negative terms have on a person, a people, a community, or neighborhood?
Negative terms can have an adverse effect on how people see themselves if they own those terms. But just because you call someone something, that doesn't mean that they believe what you say. Some people will believe it, other people will reject it. And I think that one of the important things to keep in mind with research in urban areas or what are considered under-resourced areas is the researcher seeing their stereotype of people who live in low-wealth urban areas, or is the researcher actually seeing these people? And that is an important distinction to make, because no one wants someone coming in their community to do things to them or for them. They want people to come in and do things with them, to see them as an equal partner, because everyone in a community has something of value to contribute to whatever solution the community is working on. And to fail to see that, to see that everyone has some piece of the solution, is to fail to fully understand or comprehend the problem, and it's to not see the people that you're working with as assets and their own problem solvers. Because no one is going to know the problem as intimately as those people who live with it. They also know what the solutions are. Because this is something, if they live with it, they've given thought to why this is a problem, what might work. And so that's where the work has to begin, in hearing people, in recognizing them, in saying that I see you and I know that you have value. And I want to know what you know. You teach me.
Now, with that said, I'm going to try to do a dance.
Here's a table, get on top of it.
Not that kind of dance. I'm going to do a dance. The social capital infrastructure that is in place now has been developing for the last 100 years.
Or more.
People in the community want to be a part of the solution, but they also want to know why and how did this happen to me? Because they keep asking the same question. And they keep voting the same people in office. They keep giving them the latitude to do nothing, low performing. How can a community be labeled low performing and not the elected official that represents that community? It's a transferable.
Well,
Wait, let me ask you, let me make this point and then I'm going to yield. The issue is when the James Byrd Dragon thing happened in Jasper, I attended a lot of those meetings. And one of the early meetings at the United Methodist Church up there, several people from the community said, we don't want you outsiders coming in telling us what to do, which kind of goes to what you said just now. My response was, all the aid that you're getting is coming from other places. So that was a knee-jerk response based on historical environmental stuff without thinking. That was an emotional place that came from. Because people coming to help, and I don't care who you are, if you coming to help me, and I need help, I want to help. I don't care what sector it comes from. So, but there is a dynamic, prevailing dynamic that universities are not equipped to address, which is the neighborhood politics. Anytime a government that I've seen that goes in and try to do whatever they do with a neighborhood, it gets worse. If it's a difference, if it's a service, because they're going to pick this one over that one and this one over that one, and then it's going to cause that natural challenge internally that the city either knows and wanted to expand on it, or they didn't know and then it got worse. So those are some of the dynamics outside of algorithms and formulas and science that have to be factored in. And there is a way, because we've been able to do some of it sometime, because we haven't been perfect in the solution aspect in the primary sense, using the word solution to get to the greater explanation of word. Go ahead on, Doc McCoy.
I was simply going to say, well, so there's competition in communities, especially in communities that have been, or that believe that that the pie is limited, and they're afraid that they won't get their piece of the pie. And I think that that's set up by these organizations that have money available through a grant. And so that's a separate problem. And to get people to, one of the things I wanted to say was, I think someone earlier said that change is consistent with progress. And you ask the question, how is it that people continue to elect people who don't serve their best interest? Well, I think that's an example of change which is not consistent with progress. So this is a new person that they can vote for who is saying something different. But in electing that person, what changes? What improves?
Nothing.
Because simply because something changes, it doesn't mean it improves.
Good point.
Something can change for the worse as well. And so I think one of the important pieces here is for communities to see themselves, to recognize what they do to make their community viable. What do they contribute? And how can they bring other neighbors in to contribute to solving the problem? So if they know that my neighbor has been here 20 years, the other neighbor has been here 15, so we are going to be here, regardless of who comes or who goes. But we want to be part of a solution. And so how do we do that? Is there something that a university or foundation or some sort of federal funding can help us to do that? And how do we make sure from the beginning that we want to make this successful, and in making this successful, how do we continue it? How do we institutionalize this as a way of operating in our neighborhood or on our block or in our subdivision? So I think there's a lot of education that has to go on with the community. But also the community has to know itself. It has to know the other people who are there. And they have to be committed to doing the work together. Yes, there's going to be conflict, but there are ways to resolve that conflict. And it's important for people to keep the goal in mind, not to get distracted by some sort of conflict, and not to hold on to it. Because it's important to remember, why are we doing this? What is the long-term payoff in this? Why am I sticking with it? And also to help people measure their progress over time. Because in doing the work, they may not see the progress. But in stepping back and looking at, this is where we started and this is where we are. We're not where we want to be, but we're making progress. So it's important to acknowledge the work that people do, their desire to do more, and to be welcoming. So it's kind of like, I'm reminded of when, I guess this kind of dates me too, but when I think it was Don Meredith was asked about having black people become, black players join the Dallas Cowboys. His thing was like, well, if they can help us win, yeah, bring them on. And ultimately, that needs to be kind of the attitude that people have. Instead of seeing people as insiders and outsiders, can you help and how can you help? Because if it's not wanted, it's not help.
And I think you did something very important, Dr. McCoy, and that is something that is also, I don't know, a barrier. You probably know how to study it better, and that's a whole concept of stereotypes. I have taken students down to the border to look at how colonial residents live. Mm-hmm. And their question is, why do people like to live like this? Or are we already in Mexico? Or any of that. So stereotypes are a real serious problem, but that is something that stereotypes cannot be changed by the technical fields of science, technology, engineering, and math. We need people that understand humanity itself from a human perspective. And
right, it requires, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that requires a level of humility that people often don't have. This is not your life. This is someone else's life. Can you imagine what it would be like? What is this person's story? Because they have a story. They're not living in a colonia on the Texas-Mexico border because they want to. But they're in a situation and they're doing the best they can to make the best of it.
I agree.
The question is, why do we have these situations?
There's a good book that is called It All Begins With Why.
Well, we're about to close out, but I want to have the what did it say, point on the speaker to close with comment. First, thank everybody for participating. And we're going to have a series. It'll be several of these. We may end up with about 30 or 40 different series so that we can capture the thinking, the process, and the dynamics of moving to a different level of improvements. Mark, could you put up the slide with the Scientific American? If you can find that slide. These are two magazines in Scientific American, and let me say before I talk about what's in those magazines, is that if government would do what it's supposed to do, the strife in the communities would be less. We're not asking the government or the universities or the private sector to do what we could do for ourselves. So if the government comes in, if the private sector comes in, if the university comes in, a lot of times they overstep bounds. and they become an impediment to the solution or the end product intention. So unintended consequences is something that if a community asks for help, it may be up to the universities to figure out what's the best way for us to help. Not that we're gonna figure out the best way and then we're gonna do this and then this and then this. No, because I don't know too many universities historically that write grants for the community in the way of sustainability. They write grants to do more studies with the communities, but to create that sustainable model that deals with the added value that you bring. The one example that I like to give is that there was a department in the city of Houston that started off with 2 employees. And after 4 years, they had 7, paying people $40,000 to $60,000 a year. My observation and thinking went, well, why didn't you hire 3 people and then hire 4 people from the community part-time to engage in that process? That's a sustainable, part of a sustainable model. But I'm so appreciative of the things that we've learned over the last 38 years, and particularly with emphasis on Texas A&M, because we have these 2 magazines that's on the monitor from Scientific American. Charity Productions was featured with some other organizations in both of these issues. One was October of 2021, and the other one was June, a special edition 2022. And it deals with resiliency. And it stemmed from the research partnership that we had with Texas A&M and Dr. Jennifer Herney and Garrett Sampson. So those 2 created the survey. It was the SF-12 survey. It's a national survey. And the results from the people that attend the breakfast shot through the roof above the national average in the positive. And it was after Hurricane Harvey, and it measures stress levels, physical and mental stress levels. That's what the survey did. So Dr. Horney wrote an article that appeared in the BMC Public Health Journal. A freelance writer read that report, contacted us, did an interview, and pitched it to Scientific America. And that's what those 2 cover magazines, the cover of those 2 magazines is in both of those magazines. So if we just continue to do what we have done and expand as we go, I think we are not going to be the only model, not the only demonstration project, but we'll be one of several demonstration projects that can grow exponentially into changing the dynamics, changing the language, using the right tools, science, social science, political science, to improve from the bottom up. So this is Charles X. White, your host, Community Views and Solutions. Thank you for joining us for this segment. Look for the rest of them. Look for the rest of the professors, the scientists, the practitioners, and you, the community viewer. All right, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.